Good afternoon. How are you doing today? This is the Blackman who reads aloud. I want to read today a poem that I wrote. It's called From Sea to Shining Sea. Joseph Hall. From sea to shining sea. As a child growing up, these words encouraged me. From sea to shining sea. 5 simple words sometimes even hypnotize me. From sea to shining sea. Yet as the years have passed, these 5 words have been miscast. From sea to shining sea. 5 simple words. Why are black folks constantly harassed? From sea to shining sea. Where in the hell is our democracy? From sea to shining sea. Justice in America still eludes me. From sea to shining sea. Now as I grow older and my wisdom is abundant. From sea to shining sea. Why is justice in this nation? Why is injustice in this nation still so damn redundant? From sea to shining sea. Those 5 words that brought relief. From sea to shining sea. Only bring a community's disbelief. From sea to shining sea. Isn't this guy Trump a justice thief? From sea to shining sea. America's democracy needs a true debrief. From sea to shining sea. You see, justice is seemingly hanging by a leaf. From sea to shining sea. You see, blacks in this country have a beef. All some seem to get in the end is tragic grief. From sea to shining sea. When first saw these words as a kid, I always lived free. From sea to shining sea. Hell, even as a kid, I jumped for joy with glee. From sea to shining sea. Swore to God, we'd all one day be free. From sea to shining sea. Why do these 5 words constantly hound me? From sea to shining sea. So why do these jail cells seem to only confine me? From sea to shining sea. Why hasn't Miss Justice heard our loud plea? From sea to shining sea. 5 damn words. No, not 3. Words that encourage, we all agree. Liberty bells ring loud, you see, but it's silence to some degree. Not everyone believes these words you see. From sea to shining sea. 5 damn words, no, not 3. From sea to shining sea. Injustice should never be this nation's decree. When you hear these words, you flourish. Democracy and justice should never be malnourished. All of this nation's people deserve to be cherished. From sea to shining sea. 5 damn words, not just 3. I still hope for from sea to shining sea. Those 5 damn words, not just 3. Will lead the world the way to black folks across this nation finally being free. From sea to shining sea. Took a king and crushed his dream. Heard cries and black mothers' screams. 55 years later, the same racial battles I see. From sea to shining sea. What in God's name will set us free? From sea to shining sea. What in this world will create such glee? from sea to shining sea. Nothing, damn it, as far as I can see. America's historical dilemma. America is a troubled nation, with a populace defined by feelings of rage and racism, countered by another group of the populace defined by feelings of silence and contentment, with the community of lost and ignored caught in a tangled web of political parties that will easily sacrifice the lost and ignore as the cause for the declining economic and market conditions that they are driving this nation's downward decline. While the actual perpetrators of this decline, imperialistic capitalists, continue to amass enormous wealth to the detriment of the unconscious majority, suckered into complacency by a stolen media machine, games of chance, and outright lies built around the myth of this nation's exceptionalism. The dilemma is, when will the great awakening occur and this nation is steered in the right direction for the very first time? A tattered flag and shattered souls. Why, Francis Scott Key, did you deny my presence on that ship in 1812? At dawn's early light, a tattered flag shone so bright. After a battering of British naval ships, naval might, America withstood that fight, protecting all about America that Francis Scott Key felt was right. Down the roads in every direction, the black chattel wasn't in the battle. You see, our black ancestors were no more than cattle. So Key wrote the poem and laid bare the facts, a tattered flag over tattered and shattered souls. Fight the British, they freed their chattel. Lose this fight and black souls become more than that cattle. The tattered flag that withstood that night meant to Francis Scott Key that slavery indeed was right. You know, when you sing the Star Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Key felt more for that tattered flag than our ancestors' shattered souls. The complexity of racism. People of color around the globe didn't create racial bias. It was those people who lacked skin pigmentation who created this bias according to skin pigmentation, because that group of people were the distinct minority globally. These people had to find a way to lift themselves up while negatively categorizing others who were pigmented. Then the conceptualization of an intellectual difference based on race color was created, which promoted this need of satisfying an inherent weak position in terms of their population numbers globally. Only when Europeans created weapons of mass destruction could their plan be effectively implemented. This racist programming started in European nations as early as the 14th century and still continues to this day. At various times, this racial programming has continued unabated historically across the globe. How can affected people tear down a racial programming model that is so entrenched in our society today? That's why the need to control historical content is so important, because it's the lies that nourish this outlandish presumption of racial superiority. That's why it's so easy for white Americans to misunderstand the harm that facts of black American history, because they are just as victimized as black Americans. A significant group of white Americans cannot comprehend that accepting lies and myths that have been infected by his historical racial bias isn't beneficial to the nation's hopes or the nation's future prosperity. It just keeps America out of reach from becoming a community that is beloved globally, being, as the saying goes, all that it can be. We won't be overrun. In the 1950s and into the 1960s, our communities were satisfied with singing, "We shall overcome," but the revolutionary shift occurred. The revolutionary shift occurred in 1966 when our young brothers and sisters put on the black gloves and black berets and said, "No more singing, we shall overcome," when all across the country our communities were being overrun. So today, I don't want to see no black person linking arms and singing "We Shall Overcome," because we sang and sang and sang and sang that song with much emotion and fervor. Yet America failed to listen. The line should have been drawn after Dr. King's murder in Memphis in 1968. And now we can no longer sing that song while our communities continue to be overrun. It's time to stand our ground and make our voices heard in a way America only understands. No change, no chance, no profits, no growth until we gain our repair owed. We won't buy or support those who don't or won't support us. We haven't overcome, and we refuse to continue to be overrun. 404 years. When our ancestors were free, well, supposedly free, they looked to their oppressor to do right by them. 246 years of free labor, 246 years of torture and terror, 246 years of building something for others. Our ancestors trusted the oppressor to do right and be humane. What our ancestors got is why this nation has this permanent bloodstain. America only gave our ancestors more centuries of unforgivable pain. You see, America never intended to see black folks gain. The only objective for America historically since 1619 is that white supremacy reigns and now black folks are collared by invisible chains. 404 years, black folks have been waiting for America to make it rain, but the garter belts are empty and remain blood-stained. And finally, support reparations. You have many Americans who say that they are shamed by the past history of the United States related to the financial, physical, and social and legal oppression of Americans of African descent. That feeling of shame ends when the discussion is directed towards acceptance of those harms and payments for those, and acceptance of those harms and payments for those harms in which enormous wealth was gained through the forced labor, misery, and murder, mayhem, and terror of our ancestors. Just the very mention of the word reparations sends these Americans shamed by the nation's history, scurrying like roaches when the lights of justice turn on. You see, lights only bring forth historical truths that many Americans deny that they benefited from. It happened too long ago, they say, when the truth is that many pervasive acts were occurring daily up and into the 20th century and beyond. Justice for us has never been justice for us. That justice is a blind goddess, is a thing to which we poor wise or bandages hides two festering sores that once perhaps were eyes. Langston Hughes wrote that about the Scottsboro Nine Boys. Justice has always seemed to me to be a mystery bottled up in a conundrum. Have a great day, and this has been Provoked Thoughts, Poems, and Words of Joe Hall, the black man who reads aloud.